And we welcome the Hirsch family this morning.
A reading from John chapter 4, verses 4 through 14. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life."
Whatever, Lord.
Thanks be to God.
That's great, sorry. And you may be seated. Well, I'm still going to try this. I didn't get much out of the early service group with my opening, but I'm going to give it a go here. In the resources that we've been using from a ministry team that we told you helped create the outlines and just some reading material for this sermon series, Faith at Home, when I was looking at that, they talked about a pastor who was preaching on faith at home and had this, the sermon themes, home as, like we have done. We preached on home as seminary. We preached on home as trauma center. And people came up to the pastor in this church and said, "I have some suggestions or what you can preach about when it comes to the home." A teenager came up and said, "I'd really like for you to preach on home as an ATM." I kind of like that. A young adult came up, probably 18 to 25, and said, "Pastor, I'd like for you to preach on home as a luxury hotel." A husband came up and said, "I'd like for you to preach on home as a restaurant, or even better yet, home as a man cave." And his wife, who was there with him, said, "Pastor, why don't you just preach on home as whatever Mom says it is?" Well, if you want me to preach on those things this morning, you're going to be disappointed because I'm going to preach on home as a filling station. The thought process being is that our homes are to be places and to function really as a place where we can be filled up when our tanks are running on empty. And I think we all know what that can be like at different times in our lives, not just with ourselves, but other members of our own families. I read some statistics this week, and they talked about the way the American family has been going over the last 35 to 40 years. And since 1970, we have seen an increase of single-parent homes by 150%. A child entering first grade this year, by the time that they're 18, 50% of them will experience at some time living in a single-parent home. Births outside of marriage have increased 450% over the last 40 years. Adolescent suicide, it's tripled. Divorce has tripled. When you hear all of those things that are going on in the family, folks, we have people who are many times running on empty. And when you look at the experiences you and I have out in the world, people go out and they work. And we're told that more Americans than not are dissatisfied or unhappy with the profession, the work that they do each and every day. We also know that as people go out, they usually rarely talk about their day out in the world in a positive way. You'll hear people say, "Yeah, I got to go out to the rat race." Or they say, "I got to go out in the jungle. It's a jungle out there." And people go out and they work 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And many times their experiences are where other people aren't treating them very well, and it's very stressful going through traffic to get there, traffic to get back. And when mom or dad or the adult comes back and they drive in the driveway and open up the door and they come in the house, what are they? They're empty, needing to be filled. Our young people go into their schools these days, and schools aren't necessarily the most friendliest places. We see a lot of young people tearing each other down, especially by the way that they use social media. A lot of our young people feel degraded and put down. And by the time they get home, in so many ways, our young people come in and they're empty too. And so what do you do when you have a house where parents and young people are all empty and they're saying, look, you need me to fill you up. I need you to fill me up. What are you supposed to do? And it's not just necessarily what happens out there, but what can happen within our homes. A lot of us, the needle is on E because we're facing some tough stuff. Maybe we've lost a loved one recently. Someone in our family might be, facing cancer and all that involves. Maybe we're taking care of an older family member within our home. All of those types of things. And this morning I'm going to get a little personal with you because I got to tell you, there have been times in my life, I've had high moments and other times when I have felt pretty parched. I would say to you that I've been running on empty, feeling pretty broken. I'm sure everybody here has maybe been there one time or another. And this has been one of the most empty times of my life the last couple of weeks. You know that we have a 17-year-old son who's autistic. And this summer has been even more difficult with some of the things that Caleb has been facing. Caleb has a challenge right now with changes in his adolescence and his body makeup and everything. He's repeating certain thoughts constantly. He might get the thought of Nana and Poppy in his head, and he says it over and over again. He'll say it 30 times in a minute. And so we've been working with him, with doctors, with behavior modification, and working with ways to help him to stop. And it's as if his mind is just in there, that thought's in there, and it's just clicking, and it goes over and over again. It affects how he learns. It affects how happy he is, how he can function. And when we're trying to help him to stop, he's reaching points of frustration, and you can tell he can't control himself, where he's starting to get, quite aggressive. If you were to look at the inside of my arms right now, you would think I'd just gotten out of the hospital and I had IVs in my arms. So it's been pretty tough. And I got to tell you, right now, my wife and I were searching for answers. We're trying to figure things out. And I think both of us, I got to tell you, we are on empty. We are just exhausted. We feel overwhelmed. And Wednesday night, we had a really difficult night. And then we finally got Caleb to bed, and I went back about 10 p.m. and I laid down in my bed in the bedroom, and for about 2 hours, I just had a talk with God. And I just thought about things, and I prayed about things, and I went through all of everything that's happening. And I got to tell you, I'm wondering Thursday morning, what am I going to do? Because I didn't have any answers. And I wasn't sure Thursday when I got up, as empty as I felt, if I could be, who I know I needed to be to support Jennifer. And who I needed to be patient, and how I needed to talk and react to my son, Caleb. And I got to tell you, I just I didn't think I had it in me. And I don't know if you've ever just laid yourself down in a bed and you wondered with God, what the heck am I going to do? Because, we've been talking to the doctor, and the doctor said to us, you might need to put Caleb for 3 or 4 weeks in a center where they can evaluate his medication, evaluate his behavior, see if they can help change things. And if you have ever, with your own child, maybe had to have them leave home and go somewhere else like that to be evaluated, I have a pit in my stomach like you would not believe when I think of that. And then I think of, I've always thought the rest of my life, one of my purposes in life is to take care of him. And now thinking, what if we can't? What if he has to go somewhere else? Because I know nobody else is going to take care of him like we would. Nobody's going to know the music that he likes. Last night I was in the basement with him in his play area, and he put on this DVD, and it's the song, You Are So Beautiful to Me. You should hear him sing every word of that song, every word. Nobody's going to know how to scramble his eggs and cook his organic bacon, just right, or what he likes to do in the pool, all those things. And to be able to sit there lying in a bed as a Christian, I was on E. And then what helped me was this. I started to remember the things that I had read and how I was preparing for this sermon and the resources that I, was using from the ministry team that had sent us this series. And what started happening to me is the materials for this sermon started to preach a sermon to me. Because I knew tomorrow morning I've got to get up. I've got to get to a place where I know without fear and with confidence and with strength that I can be the man and the father and the husband that I need to be. So what's going to get me to that place? And if you and I, and that night, if I needed to be filled with fuel, what in the heck is the fuel that I need? And I remembered in the material it said within our homes, not only the love that you and I need to be given to fill us up, but the love that hopefully can be shared through us is agape love. That's the answer. And when I first thought of that, I thought, that's too simple. It's almost like the Beatles song, all we need is love. Just throw love at it, it'll be fine. But the more I thought about it, it was this. In the New Testament, we talk about eros love. That's more of the romantic love, and that's not what I'm speaking of here. There's also philia love, which is, a close friendship, a deep friendship that you might have with someone. So agape love is even more than that. Agape love is a love that you have that I would say that is given to us by God. That's the type of love he gives us. But agape love is a love that has the fiercest of faithfulness. It has the deepest of devotion and the deepest of commitment. It is a love that will love even if someone else doesn't deserve it. And it is a love that will be able to love even when we don't feel our best. Even when we don't feel perfect. Even when we are down and out. We still can rise up and love others in that way. And it is a love that shows itself in its doing. Paul describes agape love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And he doesn't describe it as something pleasantly we think about. He doesn't say love is when you think about being patient. It expresses itself in its doing. Love is patient. It is kind. It's not arrogant, boastful, or rude, right? But it holds up the things that are right and doesn't celebrate in the wrongs. Love expresses itself in its doing. And so as I thought about that, I said, okay, if that's the type of love that I need, even when I'm down and out, even when things aren't going well, and the people around me, I know that they need to be loved because they're on empty, what's going to fill me up so that I can be that for them? Well, I think the clear message comes in our gospel today that was just read about the woman at the well. We have a Samaritan woman who comes to the well. And she comes at the middle of the day. Why? Because here we have a woman who's literally running on empty. Because you see, she didn't go in the morning when all the other women went to the well in the middle of the town to get water in the cool of the morning or in the cool of the evening. She went in the heat in the middle of the day because she didn't want to be around those other women. Because as a Samaritan, she was considered a half-breed. She was a descendant of someone who had gone out of the Jewish faith and married someone outside of the faith and didn't have true Jewish blood. So she knew if she went to the well when other women were there, that they would what? That they would bully her. That they would degrade her. That they would cast her down. And she knew if she went to the well at that point, by the time she got home and she entered the doors of her house, she'd be running on empty. She was also a woman who had experienced probably a great deal of pain. She had been married and divorced 5 times. Can you imagine maybe what she was carrying in her life? So when she comes to the well, she's running on empty, and guess what? Jesus says to her, I will give you living water. I can give you what you need. I can refresh you and sustain you. And guess what? What I can give you will fill you back up. It's the same water that in the previous chapter with Nicodemus that Jesus is talking about when he says you must be born anew of water and the Spirit. And ironically, this same one who can give us living water, sustenance and strength for daily living, this same one who can give living water, ironically, will be placed on a cross for us. And on that cross, he will say, I thirst. He will have a spear stuck in his side, and out of that side will come blood and water to show he truly died for our sins. And so as I was lying there in bed and I was thinking about all of these things, about what I might say this Sunday, you see, those resources spoke to me. And at that point, I realized what I needed to do lying there in my bed. I needed to return to the well. I needed to go back to be refreshed by Christ. I needed to go back and to lean on him and to re-grasp onto him and to take hold of him and to seek his counsel for the strength that I would need. I remembered as I was lying there, Psalm 121, from where shall my help come? Right, as I lift my eyes up to the hills, my help shall come from the Lord who made heaven and earth. I remember the verse Ben talked about last week where Jesus says, come to me, all who are weak and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Well, I was already in bed, but I needed a different type of rest. Jesus says, I'll give you rest for your soul. And it didn't mean, I was sitting there thinking, it doesn't mean that things are going to be fixed. But I just started to feel different. I started to feel a little fuller. And I knew tomorrow morning when I got up and I opened my eyes that with God's help, I could be the person that I needed to be, especially for my wife and my youngest son. And it was because I was reminded of what? The type of God that I and you have. The type of God who has loved us and forgives us and is grace-oriented towards us and equips us and stands firm with us and says, fear not. And so that's who we're to be. I don't know, getting up Thursday morning for me, when you get up each morning, then I was thinking, how do we then share that with the other people in our home at times when they need to be filled up? Well, to me, I think, first of all, we can share it. We fill others up by a look. And what I mean by that, you ever have somebody in your house, a parent, a sibling, or whoever, just look at you and that's all they needed to do? I remember growing up, my dad, Pastor John, he just needed to look at us and we got the message, right? We knew what he was saying. We knew that looks can kill. And there are times in our families where we got to be careful because we can just look at someone and we can just bring them down. But when we can look at someone and it's with a smile on our face, or husbands, when's the last time you looked at your wife and you just winked at her? But when I say look, I want even more than that. I think it's when we are able to be attentive and intentional with the people in our family. How many times do our children, they'll come to us? Maybe a youth or an adult will come to us and we're on the computer looking at the monitor, or we've got the iPad in our hands, or we've got our phone in our hands. And we kind of they're not that important. But it's time, I think, we need to remember, we've got to push ourselves away from the monitor. We've got to put the iPad down. We've got to put the phone down. We've got to turn the television off. I heard a story once about a pastor who was a minister, a lead minister of just a gigantic ministry. Over 10,000 people came on a weekend to hear him preach and had a lot of responsibility. And preaching was key for him. So every Saturday night he would work very hard on his sermons. And in their household, he had a wife and 3 children. The rule was after dinner, there was silence in the house because Dad was upstairs working in his study, sermonizing. And to be honest, that's the way it was growing up in the Austin household with my dad, Pastor John. After dinner on Saturday nights, Mom with the 5 of us, her job was to keep us quiet because Dad was working on his sermon. The only reprieve we had was about a 4 or 5 year period when Dad would stop sermonizing, come down for a half an hour, and we would watch All in the Family on Saturday nights. I remember that. And then he'd go back upstairs and we had to be quiet. Well, this pastor's sermonizing, and he gets a knock on the door, and his daughter comes in, and she's got something behind her back, and she says, "Daddy, would you do something for me?" And you know the thoughts that just went through his head. He's busy. He's got to get this done. It's not coming together the way that he thought. You know, he thought of saying, "Go have your mom do it," right? Moms will always do it. Go have your mom do it. But as he turned and he looked at her, something just spoke to him. Came back and he pushed the good book away from the edge of his desk and pushed his chair back, and he took her up into his lap and said, "What do you want?" And she brought a book around. And she said, "Would you read me my favorite story?" And he read the whole thing to her. You see, I want to hear sermons from a pastor like that. You know what I mean? Let's be intentional by our look. Let's focus on each other. Another way we can give agape love, I think, is through our words. In Proverbs, it talks about our words being as sweet as honey and being health to our souls. Growing up, I remember my mom putting me to bed. And she didn't do this throughout my whole life, but there was a certain period where she did this. And I knew what she was doing. She wasn't putting me against my brothers or sisters, but she'd be putting me to bed, and she'd say, "Boy, of all the children in the world, do you know who's my favorite?" And I knew what she was doing, and I could have answered it, but no, I would always say, "Who?" Because I wanted to hear her say, "You," right? Jennifer and my wife and my oldest son, Micah, they're leaving today about noon to drive back to Texas for his junior year of college. And we've had a great summer. But I sat down Thursday night. I don't know if I'd have done this. I hope I would have without preaching this sermon. But I sat down and I said, "Hey, we've had a good summer." I said, "Now, we've knocked heads a little bit here and there. I mean, nothing big." I told him, I said, "I wish you would clean up after yourself a little bit more. I wish you wouldn't procrastinate and wait till the end of, to do things, to the deadline." But I said, "I just want you to know how proud I am of you." And I gave him 4 or 5 things. I am just so proud of him, and told him how much I loved him. And just kind of tapped him on his shoulder as I got up and walked by him. So wonderful. He says, "Dad, I know." He said, "I know." Sometimes we just got to speak the words. And the last way I think we can show agape love is by making sure we're close enough to touch. I read something this week. It made me think. Men hug and show affection to their children only 1/6 of the time compared to what the women in the home do. And boy, our kids, girls and guys growing up, they need dads too, to give hugs and to be there. And even as our boys get older, maybe not as hug as much, but a pat on the back and being there for them. I read this week, I don't know if maybe we're getting soft, but it said the average person needs 8 hugs a day. 8 hugs a day. So when we share agape love, friends, we can do it with a look, we can do it with our words, we can even do it by the embrace and the touch. So let me go back to my story. Things with my son, they're not fixed. We're talking to doctors, we're adjusting medications, we're looking at all the possibilities and just doing everything we can. We love him so much, and we're fiercely fighting for him. And even though I've gotten a little emotional today, I want to tell you, even though things aren't fixed, I'm in a different place today than I was Wednesday night. And I know that I can be patient the way I need to be and react the way I need to him and be there for him. I know that as a husband of 30 years, I can do what I need to do for my wife. And it's because, you know what I did when I was broken Wednesday night? I went back to the well. That's what I did. And I went back to the grace and the strength and confidence of God in my life, and just sprinted to it and just held on to it. And it's given me confidence. I'm going to face each day without fear. And even though I may, show some emotion, I know that both you and I, let's not forget where and who we can go to be refreshed. And if your tank is empty today, go back to the well.